Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I hope you're having a great start to your week, and we are pleased to have you joining us for this particular discussion. Feel free to tell us where you're joining us from, who you are, and also be ready or free to put in your comments, your questions on the Q&A tab or even on the chat section. My name is Rispa Onyango, and I'm going to be your moderator for the day. I'm privileged to be joined with amazing people on this particular discussion. So to my left, I have Ben Roberts, who's joining us as one of the panelists from Liquid Telecom. And online, we have Julian Amboko, who's joining us from Nation Media Group, as well as Renee Omondi, my senior, who's joining us from Oraro and Partner and Company Advocates, So they're going to be engaging us on this particular discussion, and we're going to be looking at tax and tech. So how is the taxation, how is the Finance Bill 2024 going to impact the digital economy, going to impact our tech space as we know it, and then how does that double up to the global space or the regional conversation, if at all? So that is what we are going to be looking at this afternoon. So to kick us off, I'm just going to quickly put in some context to our discussion, highlight a few areas that we have seen within the Finance Bill 2024, just from our interaction with it, and hopefully that can then veer us into the discussion and conversation we are about to have, and also get feedback from you who is joining us for this discussion. So we'll go to our presentation, just a few slides. And see how that is playing out. So I think the main areas of concern when it comes to the Finance Bill, or even just taxation generally, has been how do we contextualize the taxation of the digital economy? And the key areas, I think, of concern have always been as to presence and as to establishment, especially when you're dealing with multinationals. So Kenya, I think we have seen a series of moving towards increasing the tax bracket within our base, whether it is for the domestic or whether it is for the international. And so this is the same thing that is being replicated when you're talking about the Finance Bill 2024. So looking at the trends that we have seen in Kenya, if you go to the next slide, you're going to see some of the activities that we have been witnessing as far back as 2019. So from 2019, we saw the digital marketplace conversation coming into effect, and it being taxed or having chargeable tax attached to the different revenue generating services or products. And then in 2021, we had the digital service tax at 1.5%. And you're going to see that this has actually, I noticed, was replicated across very many countries. I just singled out a few, but you find that the digital service tax is, it seems to be popular in many of our countries. Then in 2023, we saw the withholding tax addition being put in, that is the 15% when it comes to digital content creators, when it comes to how they, one, engage on the platforms, secondly, how they engage when it comes to music and photography, and then thirdly, how they engage when it comes to crowdfunding. So that is the Kenyan ecosystem. Then I sort of looked at a few other countries, of course, not holistically, but I saw that within Nigeria, they also have the significant economic present tax, which is something we're going to be discussing just shortly, which came in effect as far back as 2020 at 6%. They also have the withholding tax 15%, same as we have seen within the Kenyan ecosystem. Just this month and this year, I saw that the EU had conversations around the crypto art and how to go about taxation for that. In Sweden, there was conversation around NFTs and how to go about putting in the VAT for those particular transactions. So you can see like there's a lot of engagement on how to figure out taxation of services online or taxation of products online. And so that is what is taking us to our Finance Bill this afternoon. So first of all, we're going to be looking at the digital service tax. So the bill proposes to scrap this and replace it with the significant economic present tax, which I've just mentioned. And the rate that it anticipates is that of 30% on the deemed taxable profit. What you find is it does not particularly describe what then qualifies as SEP, as you will see in Nigeria, for example. And then it also seeks to increase the pool, or rather the tax bracket within this particular format. So I'm going to be engaging my panelists a bit on this, just so that you can see, what that means and what impact this particular provision would have on our ecosystem. Then moving forward, the bill also seeks to increase or widen the scope of the digital marketplace. That is by replacing its definition. So other than the definition that we currently have, there's going to be the addition of the particular services that are being targeted. So we have the ride-hailing services, food delivery services, freelance, professional services, rental services, tax-based services, and then any other service that is not specifically exempted. Then also in terms of defining platform, that has also, they're also seeking to include a definition to that to cover this particular specification, the short-term engagement, freelance or provision of service between a service provider who is an independent contractor or freelancer and a client or a customer. And then additionally, it also seeks to introduce withholding tax on the end of the owner of the digital marketplace as relates to a seller engaging within that particular marketplace. So again, that is a conversation we are going to be having. What impact does that have? Is it fair? Is it going to work for gain, or is it going to work adversely towards our engagement online? Then thirdly, we have the conversation within the creative economy, and that is, it seeks to widen again the definition of the digital content monetization. This conversation is dating back to 2023. So now they're seeking to widen this to include creative works, creating or sharing material, or any other material that has not been exempted. Additionally, they have put in withholding tax, whereby it's going to be at the rate of 5% for resident persons and 20% for non-resident persons. The proposal for the withholding tax ideally then makes it a final tax, and so the non-residents won't be subjected to any additional taxation on our end. 4, we are looking at the excise duties. There are a few changes to this in terms of the rates, and they've all hiked upwards. So when you're talking about telephone and internet data services, when you're talking about money transfer services, when you're talking about the fees that have been charged on internet and social media advertising, related to these specific ones, related to alcoholic beverages, betting, gaming, lotteries, and prize competition, then these have been hiked upwards, 15 to 20%. Then additionally, the bill proposes to delete the excise duty relief, specifically as relates to persons that purchase internet data in bulk for resale. So ideally, what we are potentially going to then see is an increase in this, in accessing these transactions, or even a decrease in being able to then access these particular services. So that is as relates to the changes to excise duty. Then when it comes to VAT, the particular exemptions that have been removed. So specifically, we're going to engage on issues credit and debit cards. I also singled out financial services on behalf of another on a commission basis. There are about 3 other areas where exemptions have been removed. And then secondly, when you're talking about the zero-rated areas that were zero rated for purposes of VAT, these have also been exempted and then brought in to come into the standard rate of 16%. And we're talking about being able to supply electric bicycles, being able to supply solar and lithium ion batteries, and then being able to supply electric buses. And so again, given that we have the whole conversation around clean energy, how will this affect us? Is this prudent, or what would we predict to be the end goal of this? Then additionally, and I think in coming to conclusion, we have other bills or other legislation that have been roped into this conversation. And for purposes of our discussion today, we are going to be looking at the Data Protection Act. Specifically, what the bill proposes to do is to exempt the disclosure of personal data by data controllers or processors, specifically for duty or tax assessment, tax enforcement, as well as tax collection when it comes to any written tax law. So anyone who then is able to or is required to submit such information will automatically seemingly be allowed or necessitated to share these particular data sets with KRA. And then another area that I thought was of importance was the fact that it's seeking to integrate the application of electronic tax systems with the data management and reporting systems. So ideally, different industry players will then be able to, in real time, either access or share the records and information with the KRA systems. So we're going to be talking about how this interloops with the data protection principles as we know them, the concepts, for example, around minimization, legitimacy, as well as necessity when it comes to such data sets. And I think primarily that is going to be the bulk of our conversation. Additional provisions that I also noted within the bill would be areas that will probably affect the future of work conversation, whereby there's a requirement for a KRA PIN for registration of employees working remotely outside Kenya for Kenyan employers. I don't know whether that is then what happens to payee, and I'll stand guided by my panelists. Then we have the eco levy, which is being introduced to address all the negative effects that we'd probably find with the use of electronic and electrical equipment. So that seems to be a positive. And then lastly, the conversation around royalties, which again, I think will be married with the conversation we'll be having under the creative ecosystem. So yeah, those are the main areas I think we're going to be tackling today. We have limited our conversation to the digital sector and the things that then directly affect our ecosystem. So that is why we haven't looked at the other provisions within the bill. And so with that, I want to bounce it back to my panelists. I am going to allow them to singly introduce themselves as they speak. And we're going to first just start by hearing a few of their comments on the Finance Bill 2024. What comes off top of mind? What sectors do you think are being hit or being targeted, or what do you think is the immediate impact of some of the provisions that we have highlighted? So we are going to be starting with Ben Roberts, who's on my immediate left, and then we'll hand it back to our online panelists, that is Renee and Julian's, and then we will now open it up for discussion. Ben Roberts, you're welcome.
Good. How long have I got?
You have 10 to 7 minutes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So it's, yes, my name is Ben Roberts. I'm Chief of Technology and Innovation at Liquid Intelligent Technologies. And we are one of the biggest investors, I guess, Pan-African in infrastructure to support ICT and the digital economy itself, fiber optic networks, data centers. Here in Kenya, I've been very much involved in this policy space for some years and started out being part of the task force that created the what turned out to be the ICT policy of 2019 that came out. But now I'm chair of the ICT sector in Kenya Private Sector Alliance. So watching very much this particular Finance Act from how it affects us as citizens, how it affects us as businesses in the sector, and looking at that sector-wide. Now, you know, let's start with this question: tax on tech. How do we tax tech? And I think, you know, certainly there has been some mysteries around how we might be taxing tech. However, tax is quite straightforward, and in many ways, you know, areas of VAT, income tax on companies, and personal income tax. You know, these are generally fairly well-established principles. Yet, I think the emergence of technology has actually seen a huge benefit in terms of the tax collection. We're now seeing year on year another 1 million tax returns being filed every year. KRA is saying it's 5 million, it's 6 million. And we're now seeing, the government really turning to technology to collect revenue, other sources of revenue through e-citizen and other things. So in terms of revenue collection, technology is a very beneficial thing. However, the confusion created, we're seeing a variety of experiments happening around areas of digital taxation. But I want to go back to that policy of 2019. We're lacking a formally signed off tax policy in Kenya, but we do have a ICT policy, which was approved by Cabinet, has been published on the Ministry of ICT website. But I want to read from this. So first of all, in the early introduction stages of the ICT policy of 2019, it said this policy will form the basis for the regulation of converged industry, the rules that we set up to provide an enabling environment that is secure, open, and transparent. It will define a competition framework to encourage and protect investments, enforce employment and taxation rules to drive growth, and define the supporting businesses to drive growth in the infrastructure that allows citizens and the world to do business with Kenyans. That's number one in the introduction. And then more specifically on taxes, it goes to say that the government will review the taxation regime to better align to the requirement for affordable computing, broadband access, financial inclusion, and online work. That is what the policy says. What we get is something different. Or the reality quite round, I suppose we say. But you've mentioned the whole thing. DST, digital service tax. This is an experiment, it seems. Uganda were one of the first to experiment on this. They came up with a social media tax. I think a general perception that foreign tech companies are earning lots of profits in countries, and then finding ways to get a share of corporation tax that may be being realized outside of Kenya. Uganda experiment, that they abolished that in the end. It didn't really work out. I really think what we're seeing here is that digital service tax has been a failure. I don't know. I haven't got the data on how much it's collected, but it was 1.5. It was proposed to go to 3, and the reality is it isn't really realizing its expectations. Now they're scrapping this to go to deemed significant economic presence tax. To tax people for 20% of their turnover. I don't think I'd be very surprised if those tech companies who are non-resident here, whose softwares are making some profit. I'd be very surprised if 20% is the profit margin. In terms of actual realized net profit, and normally that's what would you determine tax. So I think this is a very challenging thing, and we may see that Kenya just becomes unattractive. We saw some companies when DST was introduced. We saw some software as a service companies say, "Hey, I can't even deal with this country. I'm just going to geo-block my services. I'm not even going to offer this piece of software in Kenya," because it just becomes, there are so many digital companies that are selling things online, and some may be significant and some may be small, but I think it's just going to make it just too difficult to do business here. So it's an experiment that will continue. I don't think it's going to realize its the expected returns. Eco-levy, on the other hand, is new. It's coming out of somewhere, looking like it might be positive, but there's no earmarking in this Finance Act of these eco-levies being applied to any benefit. We do have gazetted regulations for already, which for dealing with the e-waste, which have not yet been put into play. But these things are there to actually deal with the problem, and we're just seeing eco-levies coming. They're going to put on $20 onto the price of a laptop, $3 on the price of a phone. Devices that Kenyans can barely afford as it is. We're seeing considerable black markets. We're seeing a raft of taxes on these devices already. I've told many times a story. I came back from Christmas. I'd got a couple of presents from my family here, a couple of iPads and whatever, and this and that, and I didn't take them out of the boxes. Normally you do, but I did search me, and I pretty much got about 60% of what I paid for the devices is what I ended up paying in tax at Jomo Kenyatta, and that's because we have a raft of taxes. We have you know, excise duty, import duty, East African this, IDF, RDL, it's coming to about 65% of every gadget that a Kenyan is buying. Now we're adding more costs onto the price of the gadget. Yeah. We're already overtaxing these gadgets, fueling a black market. People are bringing them in now in containers of, you know, they unlike me, they're bringing them in their suitcase, but they unpack them from the boxes. Yeah. But they're bringing them in bulk shipping and whatever. So you're just creating a bootleg market by making a huge differential between the on small devices of, you know, between what is the market price globally and what is the price in Kenya if you go and buy it from a shop. It's putting the digital divide, it's deepening the digital divide. And we see that in Nairobi, the ownership from the census results, about 40–50% of people have access to a laptop or tablet in Nairobi. But once you get into the north of Kenya, it can be as low as 3 or 5%. Even women are marginalized even more when it comes to ownership of these gadgets. So we're actually, you know, marginalizing those that are the most digitally excluded. You know, other things, you know, gambling, these taxes on gambling, we're seeing it's on advertising. You know, I think, you know, mobile gambling was a very successful innovation on top of our digital platforms. But since the last 4 or 5 years, they've been changing the gambling taxes every year. And I think every year the tax collected on gambling is getting lower and lower from the changing of tax regimes. But that's not I don't have a dog in that fight, but it's just an example of, you know, if you keep meddling with taxation and coming new things, it's just creating an unpredictable environment. It's actually making it less attractive for investors. We see more gambling companies leaving Kenya, and really, you know, it might not have had a good social impact, but the revenue being allocated from gambling is getting less and less. But really, you know, from an investor in infrastructure, let me pick on the one that is I do have a dog in the fight here, which is around the excise duty. And so this excise duty as well, Kenya is one of the highest in the region. Tanzania has pledged to do away with excise duty. Uganda is lower than Kenya actually. But at 15%, it originally came in at 20%, it was reduced to 15%. They're now proposed to go up to 15%. But more damaging is this removal of this clause saying those people that resell bandwidth are no longer able to claim it back as an input, as an input into their business. Yeah. So us as Liquid Telecom, we are a provider of you know, tier 1 internet bandwidth. We sell to internet service providers. Some of those internet service providers may sell bandwidth onto other smaller internet service providers as well, but generally there's a two-step value chain: wholesale and retail. So not only is the excise duty that we charge on bandwidth to those ISPs going to go up by 5%, they're not going to be able to claim that input cost against what they sell to their customers. So if you're buying internet broadband from an internet service provider, you might expect that your bill could go up by 30 to 35%. Now, this is at a time when, you know, we're seeing steady growth in the broadband spend of people and home broadband, but it's very, very price sensitive. We see people, even they won't renew their subscription till after payday. We're seeing very tight you know, budgets of people, and we see people even, you know, if they have another bill come in, they'll just not pay their broadband for that month, pay school fees, and they'll get broadband the next month. We're seeing this on and off, and we're putting the price up by 30–40%. It's making, again, average Kenyans going to pay more for their internet. Those in marginalized areas where we have very low penetration of broadband are just not going to afford it at all. This coming at a time when the government, through its digital superhighway initiative, and which is a key pillar of the digital of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, they're expecting that between public and private sector, we're building 100,000 kilometers of fiber. 100,000 kilometers of fiber equates to about $1 billion of US dollars of investment, really, to make that happen. Yet the end product, which is, you know, broadband, that people are getting data, you know, from such infrastructure, is going to go. We're putting up in price. We're making it less affordable to our end users. Us as an investor, it's not only creating an unpredictable environment, because it's here, it's there, it's up, it's down, the duty's gone away, but it's making it less attractive to make this investment. So I think, you know, there's some something is shooting itself in the foot here, because the taxation that can be raised from that $1 billion of investment into 100,000 kilometers of fiber far exceeds the paltry amount of money we're going to be getting from excise duty. That's where we're at. The data protection is a great concern to me. I'll let other people talk about that for a while, but it's a great, not so much from industry, but I think it's the whole of society. And you gave the example that they can get data from telecommunications companies, but it's asking for blanket exemption. They could go to some of the private schools we see around here, and they could ask for details of the children and how much and who's paying their school fees, and get personal information on your children to come and assess your tax. This is going way beyond the principles of data protection, personal data. And I think we have already laws in place. I'm sure the lawyers will have debate this thing to do investigations, but now they're asking for a blanket exemption for the purpose of assessment when we have a self-assessment process. So there are other bits and bobs, but these are the key things. Policy is not policies that we have that have been ratified, part of our national projects and agendas. It's not lining up with what we're seeing coming up, and it's going to be very damaging.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that, Ben Roberts. I think we'll go back to the last area that you have highlighted, but then also bounce back on the infrastructure conversation. I'm going to hand it over to Renee, who would also like your remarks. And I think for you, I'd also like you to probably just touch on, it seems that there is a move to a more unified approach to taxation, especially I think singling out the SEP tax and how that is moving away from a more competitive angle or approach to taxation. So in giving your remarks, maybe you can touch on that and what that means for our ecosystem.
Thank you very much. Before I proceed, I'm Renee Omondi, Lillian, partner at Oraro and Company Advocates. With me, she's a lawyer at the firm, and we've been working together with her on this presentation for this afternoon. Good question. Where are we headed? The intention of the Finance Bill 2024 overall, having reviewed it, is to expand the tax base as wide as possible. And we can see the targeted forum is the Digital Service Forum. It started way back in 2020, and they've been able to make inroads. And by increasing the tax base or the tax rate, to my understanding, they're actually making some collections and they want to collect more taxes. Therefore, you see there's the amendment and widening of the definition of the digital marketplace, which will now clearly demonstrate or refer or state the areas that are covered. That is the ride hailer, the food delivery, freelance, professional, rental, and tax-based services, as well as the other non-exempt, as you had clearly highlighted. Previously, the definition was not that clear, but with this proposed amendment, the areas to be taxed becomes more clear. And now with the introduction of, it's a mouthful, significant economic presence tax, we can see they're again targeting the non-residents, increasing the rate of tax to 6%. The tax rate is 30% of the deemed taxable profit. Of course, they have exempted transmission via cable, radio, optical fiber, TV broadcasting, internet, satellite, but there are other entities or areas that have not been exempt. With this kind of taxation, we are of the considered view that the non-residents are likely to take off and ignore the Kenyan market. The impact for me, I think it's going to be very dire, and at the end of the day, we'll be losing out on investors. Whereas I note they're approaching the SEP tax, as we call it now, from the perspective of Nigeria, who had already introduced it way back in through the Finance Act of 2019, implementing it in 2020. They intend to take the same dimension that Nigeria has taken. India, for a long time, had exempted those who don't have a presence in India. However, they have since also come up with legislation that covers SEP to cover those who don't have a local presence. Therefore, your presence in those jurisdictions will not really matter. And in essence, I foresee going forward, the same will apply in Kenya. It will matter not as long as you're interacting with the digital market platform, you'll then be required to pay the taxes. It's proposed to take effect from 1st of January 2025. We wait to see once the actual discussions commence during the public hearings before the Finance Committee, what presentations will be made by the industry sectors. But to my understanding, I believe this will have a negative impact. And also it has a possibility of charging tax on a non-resident who is making payments to another non-resident. It's not very clear if they will be exempt from the withholding tax as proposed in the Finance Bill 2024. So there's a lacuna there where there's a possibility that we will be earning taxes from income that is actually not derived from Kenya. You can only tax income that is earned and derived from Kenya, but not from any other income. But there's a lacuna, there's a loophole there that is likely to open up that Pandora's box. Now, this new withholding tax that has been introduced on the digital platform, of course, it is as a result of the non-resident owners of platforms who will be required to pay this tax. We see they'll fall under the regulations. They'll be required to register compliance issues. There's a simplified platform. We don't know how many will uptake of that. Also, how will KRA be able to monitor and ensure that all these non-residents who ought to remit are remitting? However, I remember that we were once in a discussion and they said they have their means and their ways of verifying the collections. So we wait to see how that will take place. On the digital creatives, there's a withholding tax. This bill aims to amend the withholding tax system for the payments on these forums, the content creators. I think it's because of so much activity on the likes of TikTok and similar forums. And of course, these people are earning income, and KRA is of the view that, and of course, the government policy currently now is everybody must pay tax. You can't just earn income and not pay any taxes. So for me, it is basically to widen the tax base, collect as much taxes as possible. But at the same time, I feel that there's a possibility that we will drive away foreign investors in this sector. And also it will make services very expensive. We can see that the excise duty is being increased on data, on internet data services, whereas we know a lot of activities have moved to online platforms. They should also be encouraging this kind of participation or this type of involvement and undertaking activities on these platforms, but they should not be making it expensive. We do have, and they were trying to encourage also online education, but at this rate, if excise duty is going to be increased from 15 to 20% on internet data, that means that that cost will be loaded onto the consumer and thereby making it very expensive for the ordinary Kenyan to access these facilities. So it's 10 steps forward, 10 steps back, or is it 20? And therefore, I don't think we are supporting the digital sector economy with this kind of proposed amendments. On data protection, I do agree with Ben, and already the Data Protection Act had provided for means and methodology that KRA could apply for them to be able to access this information. I wish to understand why they now need an express kind of provision that will allow them to simply just access my data. I don't have any idea, and without warning, without notice, so that then suddenly I just receive an assessment on my email telling me that, Renee, we have come across this information. Your M-Pesa statement states as follows. We've seen this is the income. This is the amount received. This is what you have withdrawn. The difference, yes, we subject it to tax. It's called the banking method, without giving me an opportunity to be heard. Because if that provision goes through, it will be very difficult for somebody to come in and try and explain themselves after an assessment has been done. I have to go an extra step to justify why certain transaction took place. And we know in the society that we are in, we do collect funeral contributions, family member medical contributions. So the question is, what information will they be entitled to access and what will they? But as crafted now, the proposed amendment actually is going to give them a blanket authority over all your data. And as Ben said, are they going to now go direct to other benefactors that you are supporting and get additional information from them? It's too broad. In my view, the provisions in the Data Protection Act as presently enacted is sufficient. Let them go through the due process, apply for an order in court, and get the requisite information. On the issue of claiming input VAT, that is also another issue that would discourage an investor who ordinarily would have the right to claim input VAT, which will assist them in reducing their tax liability by way of on the output VAT, is something that needs to be looked at. I was also going to address, the summary actually addressed most of my presentation. So the issues that we are likely to see are resistance from non-resident persons who may not derive any income from Kenya, but are required to deduct withholding tax. They'll be asking themselves, why am I subjecting myself to this other regime? And yet I'm earning income, sufficient income from and other jurisdictions that do not require me to go and undertake this additional compliance. That compliance burden on non-residents, in my view, is quite high. Then there's potential for non-residents, I've already addressed that one, to non-residents to have transactions that are taxed and the income is not generated or accrued in Kenya. And then it also aims to reduce ambiguity and specifically target gig economy tax players. So in essence, my understanding is they know or they feel that the digital economy is robust and a lot is going on, and they're just looking at targeting this income. Yeah, so that would be my input for now. I'll address other questions as they are raised. Thank you.
You have, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. You've addressed the key issues. And I think for me, the pressing question then becomes that as they're seeking to broaden the tax base, and I think you have both highlighted to this, it seems that at the end of the day, we end consumers or the common mwananchi will always just be bearing the brunt of what they're trying to do. So let me allow Julians to also come in and share some of his remarks. And maybe you can also specifically touch on the creative ecosystem in relation also to the digital content monetization and what you foresee as being the impact of that. Welcome, Julians.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is Julian Samboko. I do many things, but most popularly, I work with the Nation Media Group, where I help in the coverage of public finance, capital markets by training among economists. So delighted to be here to share matters regarding Finance Bill 2024. My preceding panelists, Ben and Renee, have spoken quite eloquently about this bill, and therefore I won't rehash what has already been touched on, just to unlock some thoughts which I think may not have been touched on. First is that if you read the Finance Bill 2024, the spirit of the Finance Bill 2024 is to reach exceedingly for the indirect taxes, as well as unlocking new pockets of tax revenue, which haven't been touched on before. And this was well captured in the medium-term revenue strategy, which was put out by the Treasury about 3 months ago, which dwelled significantly on the so-called hard-to-tax sectors. So that's the first thing I'd like to point out. That's why we're having a radical cleanup of the VAT Act. We're having a lot of touch on excise and now issues around the digital economy. The second thing is that we are in a space whereby in the preceding acts, we have seen a lot of overreach from the government when it comes to direct taxes and personal income. And following the uproar we saw in the Finance Act 23, there's an attempt to move away from that. Having set the scene as such, let me just mention that one of the things which I think we have not placed the spotlight on, which I think will touch a lot on the digital economy, is the provision or the proposal that any person supplying goods to public entities will now be subjected to withholding tax. I know a lot of persons who supply tech-related hardware to these government entities. Thus far, they have not been subject to that withholding tax. It is coming their way. What would that mean for them in terms of a tax compliance standpoint, in terms of a cost perspective, operating environment? It will be something they need to ponder about. The way I look at the switch from digital services tax to significant economic presence tax is this. One, Kenya is signaling that finally we want to align ourselves with the OECD proposals around Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 when it comes to taxation of the digital economy. Now, one of the proposals in the Finance Bill of 2024 is that we shall have the minimum top-up tax at 50% for entities of the scale that some of these multinationals were playing. The challenge with that, and why I think the significant economic presence tax had to come in this proposal, is that minimum top-up tax typically applies where entities have their parent holding company in a given country. So for instance, when you provide that minimum top-up tax is part of the Kenyan legislation when it comes to the public finance architecture, how many multinationals actually have their parent holding company in Kenya? Not many. And that tells you, so if you might not realize as much via that route, then significant economic presence tax, and it has been eloquently stated, a lot is being borrowed from Nigeria, with the effective rate bumping up from 1.5 to 6%, that's quite a steep climb. And that is where a lot of players in that space, I believe, will ask themselves many questions, one of them being, don't they have alternatives as to where they can have their operating base? So that is something which I thought I should flag as well. And finally is, I think advanced pricing agreements as provided for in the Finance Bill of 2024 will touch on the digital space. And I think it's a step in the right direction because a lot of the people who are in this space of the digital economy, dealing significantly in it, will be dealing with international transactions, and the questions of transfer pricing then come into play. So do we create an environment which is a lot more predictable? You can sit down with the Revenue Authority and say over the next 3 years, this is what we're expecting, and therefore let's get into an advanced pricing agreement in terms of what you expect from us, as opposed to this thing of tax policy changing every year and we don't know who's getting caught at what time. Digital content monetization is a discussion we have seen gaining traction in Kenya. And there was no surprise in the proposals coming into the Finance Bill because we have seen the Revenue Authority go as far as monitoring social media accounts, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, whatever it is, to try and get a pulse of where potential income streams for different individuals could be coming from. And so the widening of the scope, the widening of the reach goes back to what we have seen in the MTRS, that's a medium-term revenue strategy. In terms of unlocking revenue, remember the Treasury, by its own assessment, indicates that there's a potential taxable base of up to 1.8 trillion shillings in this hard-to-tax sectors, the digital economy being one of them. And what we are likely to see is the perverse outcome of what we have seen with the mobile money trend in this country. So increasingly, you will go to a shop which had their Lipa na M-Pesa label placed prominently on the wall. It is no longer there. People have decided to go back to cash transactions and going as far as extending incentives for those cash transactions. So if you're paying this on cash, I have a discount on it. If you're paying it via card or M-Pesa, then you will pay the full rate with no due regard to any other incentive. So that is what the market is grappling with. I think Finance Bill 2024 is certainly a very ambitious revenue-raising proposal coming from the government. I interviewed the chairperson of the National Assembly Finance and Planning Committee, and the indication is that the target is to raise 302 billion shillings of extra tax revenue. If you consider Finance Act 2023 as aggressive as it was, targeted to raise 211 billion, then you can imagine just how ultra aggressive, I would say, Finance Bill 24 is. So I wanted to flag those issues, which I thought had not been touched on, and happy to engage on any other emerging issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julian. And I think before I take it back to the three of you in terms of just then the impact of this on our local ecosystem or our different industries, because I think one thing you've mentioned is that we seem to be seeking to comply with the international standards, but there are also provisions within the bill that are contrary to that. So for example, I think, Ben, as you highlighted, the conversation around softwares, and it being a payment being connoted directly to royalties. That is definitely not, in keeping with, say, the OECD, what is it called? You've alluded to it, the OECD Model Tax Convention. So on the one hand, it seems that we want to get into those international standards, but then on the other hand, we're still having provisions which are directly contrary to that. And I'll allow you to touch a bit more on those, either the software or the hardware, and the relationship there. But I think there's been two hands raised for the entirety of our conversation. I will let you guys in onto our discussion. So we have Margaret Mwangi and Leah Bosire. If you're still with us, feel free to highlight any questions that you may have or comment, and then we'll go back to our panelists. So Margaret, are you still with us? Okay, we'll go to Leah.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So for me, my question is specifically like the microfinance institutions that have an international bearing in that. The parent holding is within the international space. Then now the branches are within Kenya. What effect is expected to be felt from this the new finance bill now? What do we expect?
Okay, I think I'll allow my senior to take that question. And then Margaret, are you now with us? Okay, no. Okay, I think that's fine. So we'll direct that question to Renee to address it. And then I think, Ben Robert, if you could touch on the local startup ecosystem. I think they're usually hit hard. So has this done the same? And even as we now look to, I think my question then is there an ideal situation whereby on the one hand, you'd still be able to increase the tax bracket, but then preserve, especially the local ecosystem, or also preserve the attractiveness of Kenya as a market? So I'll allow Renee to kick us off with the question that we have received online, then hand it to Ben Roberts, and then lastly, I'll hand it to Julian.
Thank you very much. As Julian has indicated, where there's no local presence, then you will find that we will fall back to the minimum top-up tax. But if you have, it will fall back to the minimum top-up tax. Otherwise, to my understanding, if I get it right, SEPT should apply where by a non-resident who accrues income in Kenya. So as long as that income accrues in Kenya and you don't have a parent entity here, then you are supposed to pay SEP. And where then you have other multinational entity, your circumstances then would determine whether you fall under minimum top-up tax. So just look at the arrangement of the entity.
Okay, I'll hand it to you, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, this issue with the startups, we're going through a situation at the moment where a number of well-known companies that have started up in the digital space, particularly in the e-commerce space, we're seeing failures of a few businesses. Going to administration closures. It's regular, and look, it's startups do fail, and anybody investing in startups will get to you have some gambles along the way. But we've had particularly a number of startups who've tried to address digitizing, particularly retail and things in the what is now in the informal economy. So we're seeing companies that are trying to bringing in e-commerce through what are basically informal businesses in the informal supply sector, and they don't seem to be doing so well, right? So that in itself, if that were to be more of a success, could be helping with this area of bringing people into the tax bracket. But even platforms that are enabling drivers, riders, I don't know whether, I didn't get an Uber here this morning, but I had an Uber yesterday. I don't know whether that Uber driver is paying tax, but he or she should be declaring tax through the income tax. If they are self-employed and they're getting an income, they should be doing that. But I think, the digital platforms that are enabling the type of work are hopefully going to help people to get into a situation of declaring tax. If it's creating an income for them, that means they're eligible to pay tax. But also, if it's digitizing records, it means that it will help them to be able to make declarations of tax for self-employed. But these things of putting withholding tax into everything. I think maybe the perception that people are making loads of money on these platforms is overplayed. Maybe KRA spend too much time on social media seeing people who are claiming to be making money. I've seen one or two isolated, people, and they're waving their money around. But I don't know who they are. I don't know who these people making money are on digital platforms. During the pandemic, I got a bit into creative writing, wrote a few articles, and if I signed up on medium.com to get paid for some of these things, and some were very well read. Every month I get a check for $1.65 or something like this. Maybe I didn't. I can't even think if I declared it. I didn't receive the money, but but I don't know who these people are making money. I don't know where the perception is coming from, and the point of withholding tax is to get people receiving something up front, or they will then go and do their declaration at the end of the year. But I think a lot of people on digital platforms are still making money outside of the platforms. It's what I call K-e-commerce, where they're using a set of free tools. They're using Instagram to advertise their business. They are then using WhatsApp as a free tool to communicate with their customers, and using that as a CRM effectively. And then they're using M-Pesa to receive funds, and then they're using these riders, electronic rider platforms, to deliver goods if it's goods. So the money they're making is outside the digital platforms. So the withholding tax isn't really going to help. Right? The income that's actually coming from the platforms is probably a lot less than is being perceived. And other than those, the Ubers and the whatever that are there, I think it would be easy enough to work with those organizations to encourage those people to start declaring the tax they should. And I'm not sure these methods are really going to help widen this tax base in the way that one is hoping it will, or that KRA hoping it will.
Okay. Yeah. It's interesting, but I think I agree with you. At least within our context, you're more likely to make the money outside of the platform and using it as a tool.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons the platforms are failing. I don't think the platforms are getting that, creating value for everybody. This is what platforms are supposed to do. They're supposed to create platform, value for sellers and buyers and everything else, and then they can broker a charge for being a platform. Doesn't seem that's what's really happening. It doesn't seem that trend of digital platforms is really kicking in.
Okay. I think, Julian's, just before you address the question that I have for all of you around, is there an ideal practice, even outside of Kenya, where we can be able to kill all these birds? We have a question on the creative, and that is what happens to workers on Upwork and writers. And then I think, Ben, the question around software, there's a need to address how VAT for softwares will cascade to the users. So maybe Ben will take that. So Julian's, you can address the first question as you also tell us, have you interacted with any best practices or any ideal proposal that you may have when we are dealing with the tech space?
Yeah, thank you. So, let me go back to this discussion around withholding tax. And the way the withholding tax is designed is, first of all, just to inculcate that habit of tax compliance. And that is why it is structured as an advanced tax. And I think that is where the Treasury and by and large the government of Kenya is coming from, is that the moment you know that at the end of the financial year, you must give the remainder, you must remit the remainder net of your expenses, of course, then it is hoping to ramp up this discussion around tax compliance, because it is a particular headache in Kenya and in many other frontier markets. And for players, who might be in Upwork and the likes, I think the provisions of the proposals, I should clarify, within the finance bill are very clear. It is targeting platforms, and as long as you are utilizing, as long as you are engaging in a commercial activity within the space of these platforms, then you are definitely within the radar of the tax authority. And we have seen instances, let me just walk you back. When Finance Act 2023 came into effect, we had this debate in this country around whether board members of a company are employees or not, and should they be subject to affordable housing levy. KRA came out with this guidance and indicated that that it deems them as such and that they should be. Of course, that was countered later on by the Attorney General. But all I'm saying here is you are safer beginning to work with the fact that you are in the radar of the tax authority before any other alternative guidance is issued, at least from what you've seen in recent experience. I think those are some of the issues which I've seen quite emerging. One question you have asked is around is there a best practice? I can't authoritatively comment on it from the digital space, but I'll tell you, my view has always been, as opposed to tweaking tax policy every year and creating so much distortion and uncertainty in the market, why don't we decide that VAT at 16% is not necessarily a sweet spot? Our regional peers are at 18%. Take it to 18%. It is easier to administrate as an indirect tax. It is less burdensome when it comes to cost of administration, and gives certainty to the income generating avenues of the economy. And this is not a strange proposition. It's something which I have submitted to the National Assembly Finance and Planning Committee before. We wait to see what would come of it, because this tweaking every year and then so much uncertainty. 1 year you're cutting back on excise. Finance Bill 24 is proposing to increase it again. Taxpayers cannot plan in this environment. Leaving it at that.
For that, yes. I think let me hand it over to Renee. There's a question around data protection. Ken, if you could kindly pull that up again in the Q&A tab. And I think it will just marry with the concerns I have on data protection. So James asks, is in the inclusion of data protection exemptions for KRA misplaced in the finance bill? Does it belong in a money bill? So that's his question. And I think in addition to that, my question would be, doesn't that make the Data Protection Act what's the word I'm looking for? A suggestion, for lack of a better word, because if on the one hand, we have all these principles we've been trying to comply with, all these efforts by the ODPC this last, 2 years or 3 years, and then we just have, the introduction of a clause that ideally just, damages all of that. What's the point of data protection in Kenya then? So you can address the two, and then I think I'll begin to wrap up if we don't have any other questions.
James raises a valid question, and it's an issue we have had a lot of discussion around. The courts have also pronounced themselves that the finance bill should actually restrict itself to matters that touch on the money bill alone. Indeed, the Data Protection Act is not one of the acts that affect finances in this country, and it is right to say that it is misplaced. I anticipate that during the discussions before the committee, there'll be numerous proposals to have this deleted so that then it can be tackled under the statute law miscellaneous amendments, as opposed to having it discussed under the finance bill. So it's actually misplaced. It is right to say it is misplaced because this is not one of the legislations that is considered to discuss any matters money. The second part, maybe if you can just come again on that one, please.
On the impact that has on, the data protection landscape that we've been trying to build over the years, because it seems that data protection now is becoming more of a suggestion, at least for particular quarters, in comparison to others.
Yeah, indeed, if this amendment goes through, then that statement would be right. And we need to protect the rights of the citizens and those who are generally operating in Kenya, that to ensure that the Bill of Rights is also as enshrined in the Constitution becomes a reality or is protected as should be. Because if we allow this amendment to go through, in my considered view, then that the data protection principles and the entire structure and what we've been looking at or intending to have by enacting the Data Protection Act will be diluted. So for me, this is an amendment that should not be allowed to go through. And I look forward to seeing the public presentations that will be made by the various stakeholders.
Okay. Let me hand it back to you, Ben Roberts, to finish on the software conversation. And then we have one raised hand from Linda, and then I'll run into my final remarks.
Yeah, yeah. So on software, I'm not seeing where the perceived problem is. I think software is subject to value-added tax already, and I think most companies that are selling software are be formal companies and are declaring value-added tax. I think very few companies who are selling significant quantities of software below that threshold. But they'd be buying it from someone that is, right? All software houses will be charging them VAT anyway. Maybe there might be small ICT dealers who buy some software license and sell it on, but they're below the VAT threshold, but they've paid VAT on the purchase. So I'm not seeing where any perceived problem is, and certainly I can tell you that classifying software licenses as royalties or whatever, it just means anybody who's in the business of selling that is going to package it in something else. They'll bill it in another way. They'll call it part of a managed services or something else. It won't be software licensing.
Okay.
They'll just say it's project. So anyway, so it's going to be completely ineffective. I don't understand what's trying to be addressed. Why a need for an extra grab? Because software is being sold by companies who are inside the VAT threshold. They're paying PAYE on their employees. They're paying corporation tax on their profits. I don't see where this is coming from, right? And I can't see it. It's just another experiment that we'll be seeing next year. They'll be changing it or whatever because they realize it didn't make any money or achieve anything.
Okay.
Just like so I don't really know. These things are distractions, right? I think in every finance bill we have a few red herrings thrown in to get us to talk about.
Okay.
And it just feels like one of those, right? Let's concentrate on data protection, on broadband excise, on EPRs. You know, I think these are, you know, and yeah, the DST changes. You know, these are the big things.
Yeah.
And I think we can get stuck talking about VAT and bread or whatever the distraction is.
Yeah, Kenyans, we are good at distractions for sure. Leah talks about still on companies that have foreign parent companies. What's your take on having the transfer pricing policies? Will the companies be subjected to double taxation? So do I point that to you, Renee? Okay, let me let Linda share her remarks, and then you can address that question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for this discussion. I really absolutely appreciate it. And I agree with Ben that we need to make the main things because of these particular distractions. I also think that we need to, you know, sort of indicate, I think, within the tech ecosystem, what are our minimum tax asks. There's a lot of discussions that go, I think, in terms of the process of the budget process. But I think we get up late when there's a draft, and then we start discussing that draft. I think we need to do what the Institute of Economic Affairs has been doing, where there are all these budget barazas, you know, within their ecosystem. I think that would be useful for us. And I think there are many in the room. There's a lot of CEOs from from ASEC, from the hubs, the innovation hubs. I think we need to take that up as something we carry together as an ecosystem. Then two, I wanted to just mention that in my view, the whole tax issue is really geared towards breaking the back of the small business that thinks about doing business and gives up on doing business. It's like doing business in Europe where you feel, oh my God, this is so bureaucratic that I'd rather not run a business. It is useful for you to just exist as an employee. Rather than in America where you'd think this is such a huge risk, but the reward is so huge that we will take the risk. So I think that we need to encourage small businesses in terms of, you know, how do we get together in a way that this compliance is not taxing for a small business, but so easy for a multinational who just simply thinks, you know what, we just hire one more person. It's like GDPR, hire one more person, get compliance, and we're ready to do business in Kenya. We need alternative ways of compliance within the tech system where we share resources. And we've seen this for, you know, like businesses in Paris, where there's one innovation hub that helps you comply. And Tanzania has also come up with the same thing for foreign businesses. They have a VIP service now. If you're setting up in Tanzania, it's a one-stop shop for all government compliance. We need that, and we need to start pushing for it so that small businesses have the chance to fight, and they have the chance to ideally get to do businesses. And then finally, I am still impressed and I'm still happy that KRA has not figured out how to tax the real digital businesses, the small people. And Ben, you mentioned this about Instagram, you know, and Julian, so you talked about the fact that people are still going for cash. And so the moment we tax people to use digital money, we're actually encouraging them to get off the digital economy, and they're not going to pay tax on these digital things. And even though we tax the big tech and hope that big tech ideally push this tax to local people, it's not going to resonate because we're still going to do it away from the platform. People will still go on writing platforms, register on Upwork, do the work, but then get off the platform so that we only use platforms to attract the first time. So I think there's a very little understanding within the tax ecosystem on how does this digital economy work and how do we spy it to get it to that next level. So thanks for all the discussions. And I also agree on the data protection issue that Renee has mentioned. I think that support should go to the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner because she's been very good at, can we build the law without necessarily pushing people to comply? If you have been contacted by KRA before, you know that they will look at your Instagram. They will tell you, we've seen you posting on LinkedIn, how you're doing well, how you're in New York, you're doing all these things. Imagine the power to now formally do it from your phone and do it on all these things. I'm saying that because I have experienced it myself, and just not myself, but my classmates, lawyers, people do not post their lives because of a simple Instagram search. So tell me, how will that look like when Kerry has every single power to access anything about you, including your M-Pesa messages, without doing a court order or getting back to you? I think we need to take those provisions seriously. And so thank you so much for the conversation.
Thanks, Linda. I think that, yeah, you're getting claps from Ben Roberts here. Renee, let me let you address the last question as you now wrap up with your final remarks. And I think I'll tag at Linda's question. What would be your ideal minimum tax ask? If you could have one or two, minimum tax asks, what will those be? So you can pick the question, then I'd have that. Then I'll hand it over to Ben and Julian to also give us their remarks, and then we wrap up.
Okay, I think I'll start with, and we've not discussed it here, is the issue of the motor vehicle tax. To me, it doesn't make sense. The argument that I drive my vehicle to the office for purposes of generating income, for me, is just an argument that I'm still trying to bring myself around to understand. It does not make sense. That particular amendment proposed amendment should just be dropped from the onset. And if our intention is to incentivize investors, I think we should go slow on increasing some of this, like the excess duty, and on various commodities and services. It is more discouraging. And at the end of the day, if today Ben at Liquid increases the cost of their broadband, I'll simply just unsubscribe and I leave it and I let it be. I don't need it. So at the end of the day, are we attaining the desired result of actually collecting more taxes? Or as a subscriber, I'll simply just drop and say, I really don't need this in my life right now. I'll do away with it, as Ben has rightfully said. People monthly decide this is not a necessary expense, we let it be. Now, back to the question on foreign parent companies which have on the transfer pricing policy. Maybe I just need to explain the issue of the advanced pricing agreements. The advanced pricing agreements will not affect the transfer pricing policies. Actually, it will assist various entities in letting KRA know that all our prices are as per our transfer pricing policy that we have in place. It's a simple form from the explanations we've received from the Revenue Authority that you're confirming that the prices we have charged are in tandem and in line with the our transfer pricing policy. So for me, this is a welcome relief for such entities that have a parent foreign entity, because right now we have seen quite a number of audits taking place in relation to such entities. There'll be no double taxation, to my understanding. And in the event there's anything of that sort, then we always have recourse to challenge any such assessment that comes up. So for me, there's no need to worry. The advanced pricing agreement is actually a welcome relief to entities such as those that are referred to.
Okay, thank you for that. Julians, what will be your minimum tax ask? That's just, it's like a, okay, over to you, sorry.
Thank you so much. In my submission to the National Assembly, my proposal has been this: if there's one thing this finance bill has to deal with, we must expunge that proposal to subject any business that is not integrated with e-Teams to a 2 million per month penalty. Per month. It's insane. It's crazy, because the large businesses are already integrated. It is the small, vulnerable businesses which will be exposed to this, the startups and the likes. So for me, that is my minimum ask as far as this goes. And I couldn't agree more with Renee on her sentiments around other issues, especially the motor vehicle circulation tax. And I just hope that progressively we will be given audience, as well as taking into consideration what our proposals are actually conversing to the National Assembly, because I know they are stretched between the IMF program and revenue targets, but certainly we could yield a lot of perverse outcomes from some of the proposals we are seeing in the finance bill of 2024. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julians. And lastly, Ben Roberts.
Yeah, I mean, the motor vehicle tax. I mean, even we haven't really talked about this. Is a non-tech tax, but we have base stations and fiber optic networks all over the country. How do you think we fix that when it goes wrong? I've got 50 vehicles running around the country.
Yeah.
So from companies, it's going to affect many particular companies as well as individuals. But these things are there'll be a backlash, right? People will not everybody will afford to keep their cars. Some they'll go on the market. Less cars will be imported. The taxes from importing cars will go down. But the thing is, we have to take note of something the President, His Excellency, has been saying, which is this talk of increasing the tax to GDP ratio from about 15% to 22 to 25%.
Yeah.
This is the big thing that is seemingly having to happen. It's to bring in Kenya in line with other middle-income countries in Africa, South Africa, Mauritius, and they're trying to do it in such a way as without necessarily cutting government spending, which would bring in a recession. This is the reality. However, if it's going to be achieved by squeezing more from the same place as you're getting, that is then going to not yield the results. I think this year KRA is behind with its tax targets. How we can, I guess we in the digital sector, perhaps we can think about how we can help to broaden this tax base, but we've got to do it in such a way that we don't just force people onto cash, as I think Julian's was saying, right? If the trust in the digital platforms is not there, people will just use cash more, and then we undo the gains that we've done. Anyway, I'm hoping for good discussions and real consideration by the Parliament as it deliberates on this bill. I hope that we are. I hope that this is worthwhile today, and lots of people have come. So thanks.
Thank you, Ben Roberts. I also hope that this is worthwhile. We had there was once a time when we did make submissions, and we just noted that none, they were not careful to actually hear the text piece. So at the end of the day, the result was still quite dismal, and so I do hope that this is actually they're going to be open to listening, and it's actually going to be mindful of some of the proposals that are going to be shared over the course of the week. So I think with that, I'd like to end it here. Beatrice says, thanks Elech for a timely discussion. I hope the committee will drop the MV tax, because as Renee says, it doesn't make sense at all. Okay. Was there any one other comment? Just before Nina, Linda talked about the problem with Huduma number began from an omnibus amendment in 2018 December. The amendments like the Data Protection Act is bad law. Yeah. So I think we are all on the same page as far as most of these proposals go. And I do thank you for sharing your perspectives and also joining us on this call. Thank you to my panelists, Julian Zamboko, Renee Omondi, and Ben Roberts for being present and also sharing with us your expertise. We're open to receiving any more submissions that you may have over the course of the week, even as we look forward to submitting the final document to Parliament. And we thank you again for engaging with us today. So with that, I think we'll wrap it up here. Hopefully see you at our next session.
Thank you so much.